Hi, I'm Francesca. I'm Executive Editor of Virtual Reality at The Guardian, and I'm responsible for the output of our VR at The Guardian. And I'm going to talk to you specifically about the techniques of turning journalism into virtual reality. I work in the editorial part of The Guardian, so it's my job to liaise with the other desks and think of ideas that work as strong pieces of journalism, and then think about what they are in virtual reality and if they're suitable candidates to be VR pieces. I'm going to start with this quote from Roy Amara, who was a futurist and worked at the Stanford Research Institute. He says that we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate it in the long run. We're very much at the beginning of the life of VR here. Here in the kind of hype cycle, here there's a lot of talk about VR and a lot of excitement, but we are definitely going to see a downturn when we do face reality. But it's my belief that it will rise again and we will reach a sustainable market. And it's also my belief that it's important for organisations like The Guardian to be involved right at the beginning, even if there is a load of hype around it, that we want to be very much involved in the creation of what VR journalism becomes and known for VR. At the moment, we see VR in basically two camps. There's console VR, where you're attached usually to a rather powerful computer, so things like Vive or Oculus Rift, or we see mobile, so Gear VR, Cardboard, Daydream. At the moment, the experience that you get on console is a far better one, but mobile is going to see a huge increase in terms of reach and also in terms of performance as mobile phones increase in capability. At the moment, VR is being used in all kinds of places. So gaming, of course, got in there very early, but also we're seeing VR shopping, we're seeing live events, music, sports. It's being used in education and also healthcare specifically. For therapy, for things like PTSD, it's being used, and also in journalism. People like the New York Times, Huffington Post, LA Times, quite a lot of American organisations have really been experimenting in this area. New York Times probably most notably when it gave away 1 million cardboards last November and has an app that has really quite a large amount of content, both commercial and editorial on it. I decided that we should have a look at what VR looks like for The Guardian about a year ago, and decided to prototype a piece about solitary confinement. Solitary confinement in the US. At the moment, there are about 80 to 100,000 people who are in solitary confinement in US prisons. That means being in a cell about 6 foot by 9 feet in diameters, and you're in that cell for 23 hours a day, and it has quite serious psychological effects, not having any contact with people. So it ranges from hallucinations, audio and visual hallucinations, to an increased likelihood to self-harm. So we made a VR piece that put you in the place of someone who was incarcerated in a cell to try and give a kind of perspective, first-person perspective of what that feels like. So I'll just play you a little trailer of this piece, which launched in April of this year. So the piece was made in CGI and in a gaming engine, but it's a kind of rigorous piece of journalism too, in that the environment itself was constructed from working with Solitary Watch and from 7 people who were previously incarcerated, whose voices you hear throughout the piece, and all of the kind of visual effects that happened to you during the piece were taken from the testimonies of the interviews that I did. So we launched in April, and we really weren't sure what to expect. We hadn't done a virtual reality piece before, but both the metrics in terms of downloads were much higher than we had expected. Also, the piece toured festivals throughout the year. So, first of all, Sundance at the beginning of the year, Tribeca, Cannes. It went to the White House last month, where Valerie Jarrett saw it. It also was seen by Robert De Niro at Tribeca, who took it onto the Jimmy Fallon show. So it did manage to pick up a lot of attention, but also seemed to have the capacity for both changing our readers' minds about whether solitary confinement was an appropriate form of punishment, but also potentially affect policy change as well. So last month we announced setting up a studio, as was previously mentioned, at The Guardian. It's a multidisciplinary team that I run with designers, developers, filmmakers, journalists. The thing about VR is you need a very wide range of skills, and it's very interesting forming a team of people with such different backgrounds. And I actually think that's very important for the form to develop, that you do have people with very different ideas of what virtual reality can be. We launched Underworld last week, which was an exploration of London's subterranean sewer system that was built in Victorian times about 150 years ago. And this is this kind of great Victorian labyrinth of tunnels. And you're guided by an urban explorer, Bradley Garrett, along the way. So it's part urban exploration and part kind of history tour as well. And I'll just show you a little trailer of that. So this launched on Daydream, which also launched last week. And in terms of kind of taking the medium forward, because Daydream has a controller, you can actually navigate through the space, and it gave us possibilities for kind of non-linear story and also kind of geographical storytelling. So, we're very interested with each piece in kind of exploring the potentials for the form. It's a much lighter subject than solitary confinement, but I think I'm very interested in terms of the pieces that I commission in exploring the wide range of different approaches in relation to what The Guardian would cover. So we do investigative journalism, but we also do features, we do sports, we do life and style, and I'd very much like Guardian VR to represent the wide range that The Guardian covers in terms of subject matter as well. We launched with a wide range of other supporting material. So one of the things that people talk about with VR and the difficulties is the reach and the exclusivity at the moment. And I mean, going back to Amara's Law, we do know that we are at the beginning of the cycle for virtual reality. But because we do have a publishing platform, we were able to put out an interactive which really looked at the history of the sewers. We had a couple of written features by one of our great G2 columnists, a podcast with Bradley Garrett and visual galleries. So we had a lot of supporting material as well that went around it, as we did also with 6x9. So we kind of see the virtual reality as being something that can be supported by other material where it is appropriate. So the question that's often asked to me is why an organisation like The Guardian should bother with virtual reality, and whether it is a kind of justified form for us to be making. I strongly believe it should be. When I saw the first few pieces of virtual reality kind of non-fiction coming out a few years ago, even though they are still experimental and are still, you can really, really see the potential for use within journalism. And it might seem obvious, but I mean, it's really presence. It's the fact that we can place our readers, our viewers, in the same space of our story that is kind of really radical for an organisation like us. To be able to kind of embed you inside a story and potentially make you part of the story as well is very, very different for us, both conceptually and also in terms of the way that we can engage with our readers. It also has the potential to really engage with them in a different way. I mean, we are in a world where it's very difficult to have someone's absolute attention. Even while you're reading an article online, you'll probably be having messages coming in. You might be replying to an email while you're watching a video. I mean, it's seen as a disadvantage of VR as well, not being able to do it socially and with other people. But at the moment, we have people's absolute undivided attention. And also, the pieces really stick in a different way. So studies show that you remember facts and statistics differently depending on where you are. So, you know, the old questions, where were you when Kennedy was assassinated, or probably more relevant now to 9/11 or the kind of London bombings, where you are has a very significant impact on your memory, and being able to place people within the story and then given that journalism means that it will have a neural connection, very different neural connection. So that's kind of, again, very interesting for us as a news organisation. So what we're seeing here is a new form, which I'm really interested in exploring and being part of in terms of forming what that is. The title of this presentation was really how you do this, how you turn a piece of journalism into a VR piece. And I certainly don't have the absolute answers for that. It is still really early days. But I can tell you some of my learnings, both from the two pieces we've made so far and also from the other pieces of non-fiction VR that have been made. The first thing in the studio that we always discuss is the story. Why is this relevant? Why is it worthy of being made into VR? And of course, place has to be of utmost importance. So why is it really vital that you are there? If you spend your whole time trying to divert people's attention to one place, I've been to numerous conferences where we try and learn techniques for getting you to look at where the action is and follow the action. That might mean that it's not actually appropriate for VR. It might be that something like solitary confinement, where actually the story works just as well to stare at the ceiling for 10 minutes as it does to look around the room. Or urban exploring in the sewers, where actually exploring and where you go and looking around is the story. Being in that place and sensing that environment is what it is all about. So how can we be finding stories that are relevant to the journalism that we want to do, but that are also absolutely connected to the environment? Also thinking very carefully about interaction. So we're seeing two different kinds of VR at the moment. There are ones that are interactive and non-interactive. And the majority of VR journalism out there is 360 video, where you don't have any interaction, apart from the ability to look around, which is a form of interaction. But is there something that you should be doing or can do while you're in that space? And is it meaningful as well? We talk a lot about the role of the person who's in the virtual reality experience. And we've got this graph has been doing the rounds for about the last year. So the majority of 360 VR pieces that come out are over here, ghosts without impact. That means that you're probably standing on the sidelines watching something happening around you. You can't really do very much. Character with impact means it's usually, it means that you've got an impact on the outcome of the piece. So think of a video game where you're usually an avatar within the piece and what you do influences the outcome. 6x9 was a character without impact. So you were a character, you were an inmate who was in solitary confinement, but actually you didn't really have much impact on the outcome. So within the studio, we think really carefully about why you're there. Are you standing on the scenes? Are you part of the piece? Are you having an effect on the piece? And how is that relevant to the story that we're trying to tell? When I go and talk to media agencies about the pieces that we want to make, because we're looking at supporting these pieces both editorially but also commercially, a lot of criticism is given about the experiential nature of VR and how it is no more than just a very quick experience. You go onto a roller coaster, you can fly, You can swim under the sea, but it doesn't hold you for any more than about 30 seconds. And there is an interest in narrative within VR. And for sure, this is something that at The Guardian is absolutely essential to all the pieces we make. So as well as having something that is visceral and experiential, how can you build a narrative arc? What is the conclusion for that? Where are we taking people? And when we were making 6x9, there was the audio narrative, but we also talked a lot about whether we would interfere in the experience by doing things like this, laying on text on top. And we really debated this, whether it would break you from something that was very experiential or whether it would add to it. Audio is incredibly important within virtual reality. If you can look around you, the only way that you can really be sure that you can have a coherent narrative is in the audio. And so we see a lot of pieces using voiceover or using interviews to try and hold some kind of thread through the piece. But how you do that is quite tricky. Studies have shown, and certainly in my experience, if you fill something through with very dense VO, and make it more like a kind of news report, you actually don't absorb it all. People are so overwhelmed still by being in these environments that a lot of it just flows over you. So we're working at the moment in terms of how much information can you pack a piece full, what kind of audio is that supports the visuals, and how much space do you need. And also the sound design is very important. Both of the pieces we've made so far has been 360 sound, and certainly within Underworld, getting the sound so it was very, very immersive, so you really believed that you were in the underground sewer system, was tricky, and it was also really vital to the piece. And edits, I mean, both the pieces that we've made so far have been in CGI, and they haven't had any edits at all. But the minute that you start jumping someone from one 360 image to another, it's basically like picking you up and throwing you in another place. Like, how do you deal with edits in 360? That still, people are trying different things, and there certainly isn't an easy solution for that. Some interesting work's been done by Jessica Brilhart at Google, if anyone's interested in her research of matching up scenes and matching up actions so that it fits from edit to edit. But I would say we're still at early days in terms of how 360 editing works. So anyway, that's where we are at the moment with The Guardian. We're looking to produce more pieces over the next year, looking at different forms, different types of stories, and working both with the editorial teams and the commercial teams within The Guardian. If you want to get hold of me, this is our VR email address at The Guardian, and you can follow me at Fran Panetta on Twitter.